Okay, guys, let's move on to climate change news, climate change headlines, and more. I just needed to go through that stuff. Obviously, um, big day or tomorrow or just business as usual. Anyways, we have 108 watching, 35 likes. Please like up the video. Thank you all again for being here each and every day on Black Bear News. And let's go into the news that matters, which is climate change news. The news that really matters. This is actually things that affect the planet on very real levels in every single way, shape, or form. I read something about this just a few weeks ago. The U.S. is one of the world's biggest sources of plastic pollution. Much of the plastic Americans toss into blue bins isn't recycled. This is from October 30th. We already read this and we already know this, but just another iteration of the same news. Much of the plastic Americans toss into blue bins isn't recycled. Kind of depresses you, doesn't it? Especially if you think you're helping by recycling. And I still think I'm helping by recycling, even though, unfortunately, I know that I'm not. It makes me feel better, okay? Sometimes the rituals that make you feel better are everything, the only thing you have. Sometimes. Let's move on. Hurricane Eta, or Ida, however you want to say it. I don't know how to say it. Hurricane Ida heads for Nicaragua as late week developments remain very uncertain. This is from today. Eta, I guess that's the right way. Eta became a hurricane early this morning and is continuing to strengthen as it slowly approaches the Nicaraguan coast. The center is expected to make landfall tomorrow morning. The storm will bring violent winds to the coast section. Winds at or near Category 3 strength are forecast. In addition, the National Hurricane Center prediction is for storm surge of 10 to 15 feet above normal tide levels. Yikes. That's a lot. That's a lot of surge. And potentially catastrophic rainfall over the mountainous section of Nicaragua and Honduras. The coast of Nicaragua is under hurricane warning, while coastal Honduras is under hurricane watch, meaning hurricane force winds are possible there as well. Both countries' mountainous areas will get the brunt of Eta's moisture. Moving on, this is a very old article, 4 years ago. But probably most likely true. And it doesn't really matter if those cars are internal combustion engine cars or ICE cars or electric cars. Whatever kind of cars they are, the number of cars will double worldwide by 2040. From Business Insider, 2016, the global number of cars on the road in kilometers flown in planes, well, they included planes in this, will nearly double by 2040, according to a report released on Monday by research house Bernstein. Well, thank God coronavirus came along and kind of knocked us out of the trajectory for a little while. The airline industry is still having big problems. And I would imagine that the car industry is having some problems as well, but probably not as big as the airline industry. But they're at least being slowed down a little bit this year. I don't know about next year or the year after. Cars are projected to reach the 2 billion mark by 2040, while air travel kilometers are set to hit 20 trillion in the same period. Can you imagine 20 trillion air miles? Bernstein said it expects most of the transport growth to happen in emerging markets like China and India, of course, as global populations are set to rise by another 2 billion over the next 25 years to 9.2 billion. Of course, I don't think that we hit any of these numbers, probably due to many factors. Economic collapse, fossil fuel industry collapse, climate collapse, right? All of these things are part of the mix. Let's move on to another headline. Trump's Interior Department pressures employees to approve seismic testing in ANWR, which is the Wildlife Reserve. In Alaska, Fish and Wildlife Service employees say they've been ordered to fast-track a permit before year's end, despite the potential risk to polar bears and the tundra. Yes, this is obviously outlining the absolute carnage the Trump administration is unleashing on the environment. They don't care. They know about climate change, and they don't care. Let's move on to this article from The Guardian. Crossroads of the climate crisis. Swing state Arizona grapples with deadly heat. I want to look into this a little bit farther, and give me one moment. Maricopa County is home to America's hottest city, where deaths from heat are weighing on voters' minds. Are they now? Even now, even Moore can't think why his father didn't tell anyone that the air conditioning in their house was busted. I honestly don't know what was going through his mind. He said that week 3 years ago, temperatures in Phoenix, Arizona were forecast to top 115 Fahrenheit. Moore, his wife, and 2 children went to the mountains for a camping trip, and his dad, Gene, stayed behind. A few days later, Gene died. The air conditioning had been blowing hot air. He'd opened a window, but it was too hot. My dad's heart basically gave out on him. Phoenix, America's hottest city, is getting hotter and hotter, and Moore's father is one of the hundreds of Arizonans who have succumbed to the desert heat in recent years. Every single year, they set new heat records in Arizona. In August this year, Maricopa County, which encompasses Phoenix, recorded 1,000 COVID-19 deaths. The same month, the county was investigating more than 260 heat-related deaths. This summer, temperatures here stayed above 90 Fahrenheit even at night, for 28 straight days. I can't even really, it's just hard for my brain to even comprehend that. Above 90 Fahrenheit even at night for 28 straight days, with the scorching weather in July and August breaking records. I'm going to go back again. That's just breaking my brain to imagine never dropping below 90 Fahrenheit. It was so hot and dry that towering saguaro cactuses that dot the landscape began to topple over and die. The cactuses were dying due to heat. Can you say that something is very, very wrong with the climate? When cactuses can't even withstand the temperature. At the same time, wildfires across the western U.S. this year cast a foreboding orange glow over the region and clouded Phoenix communities, already breathing some of the highest concentrations of toxic pollution in the nation, with even more smoke. I grew up in the desert in the heat, Moore said, but I think about what it's going to be like in another 5 years and 10 years. The thought has been weighing on him and many other Arizonans as they cast their ballots ahead of next week's elections, even amid a global pandemic and the economic, I'm sure this is from last week, economic catastrophe. It has triggered polls find that Americans increasingly cite the climate emergency as a major concern, and they should. That's especially true in regions like Maricopa, where the crisis is already having deadly effects. Once a stronghold of Western conservatism, Maricopa County has been slowly undergoing a political transformation and has become one of the fiercely contested election battlegrounds in the nation. Asked to choose between a Democratic presidential candidate, Joe Biden, who recognizes global heating as an emergency, and a Republican, Donald Trump, who has called it a hoax, a growing number of voters in the Valley of the Sun say that they are seeking leadership that will address climate and help their desert homes survive an increasingly precarious future. Since 1865, the temperatures in Maricopa have risen by nearly 2 C. So in this region, regionally, they have risen 2 C since 1865. And since the 1950s, the water level in the region's wells has dropped by 125 feet. 125 feet. Even in a politically divided swing state that's hard for anyone to ignore, a recent survey found that nearly 3/4 of Arizonans agree or strongly agree that the federal government needs to do more to combat climate change. Even after the coronavirus pandemic hits this year, when researchers at Yale University conducted an annual survey of voters across the country, climate change went up on a list of voter priorities. Finally, in the year 2020, when all the effects of climate change were supposed to hit us, 80 years from now, when they're hitting us in 2020, now everybody's like, oh, I think climate change is actually an issue. Okay. You see that reflected in how much political leaders, especially Democrats, have been talking about climate change this election, said Anthony Lazarowitz, an expert on public opinion of climate change at Yale University. For the first time in American history, climate change has reached the very top echelons of voting issues. Oh, wait till it's the only issue anybody ever cares about. Wait till when it's wreaking serious havoc on every aspect of life that we know. If you give a climate arsonist 4 more years in the White House, why would anyone be surprised if we have more of America ablaze? Similarly, in a heated debate between the state's U.S. Senate candidates, the incumbent Republican Martha McSally, who serves on the Senate Energy and Natural Resources Committee and is a close ally of the president, acknowledged the climate is changing. Wow. Acknowledgement, but derided any heavy-handed approach to addressing it. Wow. Retracting that acknowledgement, or just, business as usual. Meanwhile, the Democrat Mark Kelly, a former astronaut, mused about how fragile the planet looks from low Earth orbit. There is no planet B. He said we have to do a better job taking care of the planet. Ding, ding, ding. Ultimately, Republicans' resistance to acknowledging and addressing climate change will hurt them politically, said Jeff Flake, a former Arizona senator. I do think over time it really makes it difficult to attract particularly the younger generation, millennials, Gen Xers, and whoever else when we don't have rational policies on climate change, said Flake, a Republican who has been critical of Trump's politics. Like many areas of the country, in Maricopa, poor neighborhoods and neighborhoods where Latino and Black families live are worst affected by both the heat and the bad air. Across the U.S., young voters and Latino voters are especially likely to prioritize climate action, polling shows. Latinos are more convinced climate change is real and that it's human-caused, more worried about it, and more supportive of action than any other voting bloc, said Lazarowitz of Yale. For a decade, we in our communities have been raising our voices about these issues, says Blanca Abarca, 54, a community activist. Abarca lives in a largely Latino neighborhood in South Phoenix, located downwind of an industrial dump. The EPA has found is leaching low levels of toxic compounds and heavy metals, including arsenic, barium, mercury, and nickel. She, her husband, and their teenage daughter have MacGyvered their whole house to cope with the heat. They rely on a swamp cooler, ventilators on their roof and ceiling, and the trees they planted all around their house. Lovely trees as a heat abatement measure. Beautiful, old school, smart. They've got an AC unit, but they hardly use it. The high electricity bills could send them into debt. I tell people who can vote to do it for the community, to elect leaders who are going to better this country and for the future of our children, she said, while on a break from gardening at Spaces of Opportunity, a community farm in South Phoenix, where she and many others in the neighborhood come for a respite from the heat. In the desert, we just have to take climate change very seriously, said Katie Gallego, who was elected mayor of Phoenix. In part, thanks to a wave of young progressive Latino voters, Gallego has a bachelor's degree in environmental science. That's great. We need elected officials who are very clued into the climate catastrophe. Anyways, that is what is happening in Phoenix and Arizona. Let me see. Keith Hayes, sacrifice zones, indeed. Basil Peterson, I'd rather die for an idea than live with none. Stephen Biko. Quote from Stephen Biko. Jacob Gordon, the extreme heat and dryness is killing trees in NorCal. It's killing trees in SoCal, too. I would often drive around looking at the trees, dying a slow death due to heat, bad air, high UV, etc. Jay Thadcast says, Phoenix, what ignorance and hubris to claim they care about the climate there. Good point. Kuro hikes killing trees in Oregon and Washington as well. Okay. Yes, the heat is killing trees all over the country. Let's move on to a post from Zach Labe. We are finally getting some ice regrowth. It's now November 2nd. So it's very slow to reemerge in the Arctic. Zach Labe says ocean and air temperatures have finally cooled enough for the sea ice formation in the Siberian Arctic. A rapid expansion of sea ice extent is currently ongoing. That's good news for the moment. We need every bit of ice that we can get in the Arctic. Somebody replied, absolutely brilliant. Good to see the ice again, even though it's 17C today in November. I don't know where a different beat HCR is from, but 17C is quite warm if you're in a northern clime. It's in the mid-60s, I believe. Followed up by a post from AC. Water and air temperatures remain abnormally high across the eastern Arctic. Air temp is now below zero, but it is 10 to 20 C above normals. We actually covered this, I think, just yesterday. So ice is forming as expected, but it remains to be seen how thick it will get during this winter and how long it will take to melt in 2021. Indeed, that is the question. This is from today. A look at the anomalies today in the Arctic. As Jennifer Hines would say, non-good. And I don't know, this article, just a headline from an article in The Guardian. I don't know if you want to file this under greenwashing or what, but the headline says aggressive push to 100% renewables energy could save Americans billions, says study. Sure, we may save a whole lot of money in energy costs. But what cost the planet is the question. It's a question a lot of people have. What's the long-term cost to the planet for renewables? Or if we just rely on renewables to try and clean up our energy problems or our energy use, energy consumption, our consumption of the resources on the planet, all of these things have to be taken as a whole. It is not Renewable energy is not a silver bullet for fixing the problem of climate change. Indeed, many are looking at this as a profit motive or, as a profit center, renewable energy. It may save people money. I'm sure it will on some level. But who cares about saving money when we really need to save the planet? And another interesting article, somebody sent me this a little while ago. Swedish grocery store prices items based on their carbon footprint. I wonder what the prices actually are. I read through this article and I actually didn't see how much of a difference it made in the prices. So this was just a way to make people aware of the CO2, the emissions involved in actually producing food. So I guess that's good. It looks like an experiment that was run in something called a climate store. So people were given budgets of 18.9 kilograms of CO2 and told to go shopping. So I don't know how much, they didn't really say how much 18.9 kilograms of CO2 would allow you. And I'd like to see, carbon emissions, factored into the price. The actual price in dollars or pounds or krona or whatever it is you're using. I'd like to see that happen and then see what the actual prices would be. That would be helpful. I don't know how helpful this article is because they don't really list anything about that. But whatever, an interesting concept nonetheless. Lastly, I want to read some comments, guys. I've been trying to read some comments and I've been really terrible about remembering to read the comments, but we're going to go visit McCorkle's Corner before we leave, before we wrap it up. This is from, I want to say yesterday or maybe the day before. Marty McCorkle says, in regards to the super typhoon, 195 mile per hour winds in that super typhoon. That sort of gust puts bugs in your teeth, plus flying rooftops, which are hard to spit out even with a rinse of Sprite. The daunting task of changing the climate back to its good old days, factory setting, seems pretty darn impossible. Not a scientific term. Like putting goose feathers let loose during a super typhoon back into its original pillow. I hope I never have to do that again. Soon there will be no need to report horrific weather events elsewhere because horrific weather climate change news redundant. Climate change news will replace the dog bites man story, and how's climate change could become the new how are you? Super typhoons will simply be called typhoons, while the less common old-fashioned similar typhoons will be classified as tiny phoons. That's good. Or granny typhoons. Climate is changing, and like it or not, will be changed with it. Hopefully, we pull off this profound existential and psychological change with words of poise, not words of poison. So be the climate change you want to see. And don't stick your head out of the window in 195 mile per hour winds. A flying rooftop at that MPH really leaves a mark. And on to another McCorkle comment. This is from, I don't know, maybe about a week ago. When talking about methane, maybe the methane will demethane or methane back, the way climate change, or climate may change back. Plus how crashed cars occasionally uncrash, like my uncle's friend's accountant's Volvo, that died of natural causes, namely through collision with a jackknifed logging truck. The truck was not actually logging at the time, preferring to practice traveling sideways. Boom, or skloink. And one beheading later, the Volvo was totes fine, except for a scratch on the door, which may have already been there, before the accountant's head was removed from its normal place, though luckily retrieved from a gully in time for the services. A closed casket thingy-do. Somewhat miraculous. I mean the Volvo, not the accountant's head, which received way more than a mere scratch. In any case, to hope that the many and vast plumes of methane slip back into where they emanated from in an I Dream of Jeannie style may sound absurdly wishful. But we need to loosen this debt ceiling on optimism right now and go circus grade apeshit manic, or the masses might get wind of all the asmei deafe. Asmei I deafe. I'm sorry, I can't read that very well. If I'm picking my Latin erectly. Okay. After all, one does not want to express pessimism simply because one's planet is becoming significantly less livable, or else one gets a reputation for pessimism, losing one's status as a bon vivant and cheerful boulevardier. Being aware that Earth's sword of Sophocles may at any time go full logging truck on one's head can take much of the sparkle out of before dinner cocktails. So try not to speak of this potentially horror-filled methane-leaking dystopic near future, except in the most glowingly positive terms. And if things hot up unsurprisingly fast, raise an eyebrow of serious concern and click one's tongue as if the collapse of both industrial civilization and of the biosphere is an utter surprise to you. This will preserve your popularity among the unaware many, the poor darlings who aren't blackberries like us. Hey, there are many ways that you can support this channel: PayPal, Venmo, Square, Bitcoin, Ethereum. All the links are in the description box below. You can also support me on Patreon for as little as $1. I post all the live streams there, so you can watch the full live streams at Patreon